I don't know who I am. Sometime this last week or so, I've heard somebody somewhere say these words. I can't for the life of me remember who or where, but someone said them. I think that's a sign that I'm getting a bit older. And hearing these words again took me right back to the memory of my mother-in-law, a dear soul called Constance, who died some years ago. Now, she spent her last 3 years down in Bristol, living in a residential care home called Windville House, which is actually the sister house to Osborne Court, the care home just next door here. And these were very happy years for Constance. She was beautifully cared for, she loved the company, and she loved the fact that we were close enough to be able to pop in and see her regularly. She's up there with one of our little puppies. It's very cute. But in her last few months, she became increasingly disorientated. And that was a combination of the dementia she was living with, but also the fact that she had cancer, which we actually only found out about shortly before she died. And in those last months, this was her regular refrain: I don't know who I am. I don't know who I am. It can be a scary, disorientating place to be in life, not knowing who we are, losing or perhaps never finding that sense of self that keeps us grounded, that enables us to grow, to develop, and to reach our potential, helps us to build the sort of healthy, life-giving relationships that we're created to have. Knowing ourselves, who we are and how we relate to others, ourselves, to God, and to the world around us is a key part of our journey in life, our path to maturity and fruitfulness. And perhaps one of the most important keys to us developing a healthy sense of identity is getting to know God, allowing our view of ourselves to be shaped and informed by how he sees us, who he's made us to be, and what he's made us for. Knowing me, knowing you, isn't just the title of a great ABBA song. It's also illustrative of the powerful dynamic that comes from living life with Jesus. That's why we've chosen for this new sermon series in the mornings to look together in the coming weeks at who Jesus is and what that means for us. And we're going to be doing it through the lens of a series of amazing I am statements that Jesus made about himself, recorded for us in the Gospel of John. So last Sunday, Simon kicked off the series with the perfect I am for Easter Day. I am the resurrection and the life. But I'm aware that with the 10:30 last Sunday having been an all-age celebration, that some of you may well have not heard Si's sermon, so it's really worth catching up online if you did miss it. He did it at 9 o'clock and at 6:30, but not 10:30. And in the coming weeks, we're going to be thinking about how Jesus said, I am the bread of life, the light of the world, the gate, the good shepherd, the way, the truth, and the life, and the vine. But today we're going right back to the beginning. We're going to introduce ourselves in the company of Moses to Yahweh, the great I am. Now, if there was ever anyone who might have been confused about his identity, it's Moses. Some of you will know his story well, but for others it might be quite new. So here's a brief recap. It's a story that we find in the book of Exodus. That's just the second book of the Bible. But we actually need to go back to the first book, Genesis, to get the context. In Genesis, we read how God created the heavens and the earth, how human beings were the pinnacle of his creation, made in the image of God for special relationship with him. But things went wrong. Humans chose to go their own way, not God's. And the beauty and harmony and order of God's creation got corrupted by evil. Nothing was ever quite the same again. Then God made a plan of salvation. He chose a particular people, the people of Israel, calling them into special relationship with himself. He wanted to show the world what it looked like to be a people who lived under the blessing of God, so that they too might be drawn into relationship with him. God's plan was always salvation for the whole world, but it started with the promises, the covenant he made with Abraham, reaffirmed to his son Isaac, and then to his son Jacob. And Jacob was, of course, the father of 12 sons, one of whom, Joseph, his favourite, is famous for his multicoloured coat. A bizarre sequence of events took Joseph away from Canaan, the land that had been promised by God to the Israelites, down to live in Egypt. And an even more bizarre set of events, including a famine across the whole region, brought Joseph to prominence in Egypt and led to his whole family joining him there. And that's where we leave the story at the end of Genesis. Fast forward 400 years and we pick up the story again in the book of Exodus. God has indeed blessed the Israelites. They've multiplied in number and become exceedingly fruitful. And the Egyptians don't like it. Pharaoh, the king, was afraid. And like so many people who were afraid, he acted aggressively to protect his own interests. The Israelites were oppressed, forced into slave labor, and set increasingly impossible targets. And then came a direct attack on the people themselves, an edict that every baby boy born to Hebrew women should be killed and thrown into the River Nile. So this was the world, this was the reality into which the baby Moses was born. Seeing he was a fine child, his mother hid him in a papyrus basket amongst the reeds, where, in another bizarre twist, he was discovered by none other than Pharaoh's daughter herself. And she took him to live with her as her son, a prince in the palace. Here he was treated with all the privileges of royal life as he grew to adulthood. But all the while, the treatment of the Israelites by the Egyptians was becoming harsher and harsher. And one day, Moses caught a glimpse into this harsh reality. He saw an Egyptian ill-treating one of his own people, and something in him ignited. Swiftly, he took action, killing the Egyptian and hiding him in the sand. Now, of course, what happened reached Pharaoh's ears, and he was understandably furious. So Moses fled to the land of Midian, where he was taken to be an Egyptian. He was taken in by family, worked as a shepherd, an occupation that was despised by the Israelites. Goodness, Moses must have been confused about his identity. I don't know who I am may well have been a refrain running through his mind. Am I a Hebrew? An Egyptian? A Midianite? Royalty? Or am I simply now a shepherd, a foreigner living in a foreign land? And this is where we pick up the story in today's Bible reading. Moses was out tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, when he comes to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of a burning bush. But a bush that didn't burn up with the fire. And that was weird. Now, it's worth knowing that when we hear about the angel of the Lord, not an angel of the Lord, but the angel of the Lord in the Bible, what we're talking about is a pre-incarnate manifestation of Jesus himself, which is pretty cool, isn't it? Watch out for those mentions of the angel of the Lord. Well, Moses is intrigued. He goes over to look at the bush to see what's going on, when suddenly God calls to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. He wasn't expecting that. A personal call. God knew him by name. Moses found himself standing on holy ground as God revealed himself as the God of his forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What was going on? Well, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. But God had something more for Moses, a particular call on his life, a task for him. Verse 7. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. God shared Moses' concern for justice for the Israelites. But Moses, knowing his efforts to help before had not been well received, feels a deep sense of inadequacy. Verse 11. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Who am I to go?" Have you ever felt that same sense of inadequacy to respond to God's call? It's interesting that God doesn't actually answer Moses' question. Instead, this is what he said: "I will be with you. I will be with you." It's like God saying, it's not about who you are, it's about who I am. What matters is whose you are, who you belong to, and you are mine. I see you. I know you by name. I have called you. I believe in you. But Moses isn't convinced. He needs more. Okay, maybe you know me by name, but who are you? What shall I say? Only he asks it a bit more subtly. Verse 13. Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, "The God of your fathers has sent me to you," and they ask me, "What is his name?" Then what shall I tell them? And then comes this mesmerizing answer, which goes right to the heart of who God is. Verse 14. God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. I am who I am." Yahweh, as it's written in Hebrew, no vowels in Hebrew, the personal name that God gives himself, or Yahweh as we read it, best described as Lord, or capital letters. Our God is the God who is and will be forever, the great I am. He's the one who sees us, knows us, beckons us to come closer to see what he's doing, the one who surprises us when we're least expecting it, the one who believes in us. It was like that for me, like that when I received my call to ordination over 30 years ago now. Even though God put these words, non-stipendiary ministry, very clearly into my mind as I was praying one morning, I had no idea that it was me who was being called. I just assumed it was my husband, Chris. And it was only as the weeks went on that God beckoned me to take a closer look for myself, rather as Moses was beckoned to explore the burning bush. And it began to register that maybe, just maybe, it was me who was being called. It was a surprise. And I didn't feel in the least bit adequate to respond to the call. But I did know the presence of God going with me as I took those tentative steps, the first steps to explore it. I will be with you is the promise of God. Almost the last words that Jesus spoke to his disciples. Surely I will be with you to the very end of the age. And God doesn't ask us to do anything that he doesn't already know that we're capable of. Jesus said this, recorded for us in John's Gospel: "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last." When God calls us to do something, he also equips us. He provides all the resources, all the support that we need to respond to his call. He did it for Moses, he's done it for me, and he'll do it for you. But we mustn't hide behind our inadequacies. Rather, we need to let God surprise us, develop us, and help us become who he sees we can be. So what, I wonder, is going on in your life right now? Is there something unusual, something that's got your attention, something that you need to move closer to investigate for yourself? Or perhaps you share that same sense of passion we saw in Moses to do something about an injustice that's going on in the world around you. A sense of holy discontent is often fertile ground from which we hear the call of God to take action. Or maybe you know exactly what God's calling you into, but you've doubted your ability to do it. You don't fill up to the task. Maybe you've been hiding behind your feelings of inadequacy. Well, God sees you. He knows you by name. He calls you, and he believes in you. It's time to come out of hiding and to take some tentative steps forward, and to take them with the absolute assurance that the promise of God is, I will be with you. It's a journey of faith. God meets us in it and walks with us on it. Paul wrote this to the Ephesian Christians: "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." Knowing Jesus, knowing God, is an adventure. And getting to know him better helps us find more of our sense of self, who we are in Jesus, and what he has for us to do and be in life. Jesus came to make God known, Yahweh, in flesh and bone, the miracle of the incarnation. In his life, in the things he said and did, Jesus showed us so much of who God is, all the I ams that we're going to be exploring in the coming weeks. But tucked away in the 8th chapter of John's Gospel is this most provocative exchange between Jesus and the Jews. Jews who were really disturbed by the claims that they heard Jesus make about himself. Are you greater than our father Abraham, they ask? He died, and so did the prophets. Who do you think you are? Gosh, that's quite a direct question, isn't it? Who do you think you are? And the exchange continues from Jesus. Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. Their response? You're not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? Very truly, I tell you, Jesus answered, before Abraham was born, I am. Jesus knew exactly who he was, and he couldn't have been more explicit in declaring the truth of who he was, Yahweh. Well, to the Jews, it was blasphemy. They picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus slipped away. It was not yet his time. Jesus knew who he was, and he knows who we are, each and every one of us. He sees us. He knows us by name. He calls us, and he believes in us. So let's press in to knowing more of Jesus, the great I am. And let's see what he has to show us of ourselves along the way. Can ask Sam and the bands to come back up and to prepare to lead us on in our time of worship. And as always, there's an opportunity for us to respond to anything that God may have been saying to you this morning. Maybe nothing to do with what I've been saying. It may be that God's just been speaking to you in the space of your own heart. So if you've brought anything with you that you'd appreciate somebody praying with you for this morning, please do come as we worship together.